Okay, here's a thought for you. What if the very structure of our classrooms, the model we've used for centuries, is just fundamentally wrong? What if the whole time we've been teaching our kids in a way that isolates them, right at the moment they should be learning to connect? Today we're diving into the pretty revolutionary ideas of an educator named Talgat Akbashew. The famous educator George Polya, he absolutely nailed the problem with this observation. It's a scene we all recognize, right? One person stands at the front talking, while a whole class just sits there, supposedly listening. But is that really learning? Well, Talgat Akbashew argued it was the exact opposite. So Akbashew pointed out this huge paradox right at the heart of modern education. And it's one of those things that's so obvious once you hear it, yet it's the foundation for almost every single classroom in the world. He was really struck by this simple, kind of weird fact. For 10 or 11 years, kids are all physically in the same room. But during the most important part, the actual lesson, they are totally isolated from each other. They're forced to sit still and just listen to the teacher. I mean, really think about it. The only time students have any real, spontaneous communication with each other is during the breaks. The lesson itself actually forbids the very thing, that peer-to-peer interaction that could spark some genuine understanding. So what was Akbashew's big idea to solve this paradox? Well, it was something that aimed to completely flip the traditional classroom on its head.
He called it intellectual cooperation. And the whole point was to redesign education so that collaboration wasn't just some special group project you do once in a while. Now, it was meant to be the engine of learning. The teacher's job would shift from being a lecturer to being a facilitator. But okay, why would this actually be better? The logic behind it is surprisingly simple and really kind of elegant. It all comes down to something you could call intellectual distance. Picture this. The gap in understanding between a teacher who's an expert and a student who's just starting out is massive. It's huge. And because that gap is so big, it can be really, really hard for a teacher's explanation to actually click for a student who's struggling. But the intellectual gap between two students, it's tiny. A student who just figured out a concept can often explain it to their friend in a way that's way more relatable and effective than the teacher can, That connection just happens faster, more naturally. But here's the thing. Just creating a more efficient way to learn facts wasn't Akbashew's ultimate goal. Not at all. Intellectual cooperation was just the tool for something much deeper, much more profound. This is the crucial point. Akbashew wanted to replace what he called learning activity, which is just, following a curriculum, with true cognitive activity. This moves students from being passive buckets waiting to be filled with information to being active participants in their own growth. The goal becomes self-development, not just memorizing stuff for a test. This idea directly attacks a problem that even Vladimir Lenin pointed out, the issue of dead knowledge. In our world, things move so fast that information becomes outdated quicker than we can teach it. By the time an engineer graduates, the specific models they learned in school might already be obsolete. So the only real solution is to teach students how to develop themselves, how to learn for life. So as you can probably imagine, this was a pretty radical idea. This wasn't just some small suggestion. It was based on a full-blown, rigorous critique of the entire educational system. And this critique wasn't just some abstract theory. An analysis of the standard math curriculum, for instance, showed it was broken in at least 5 fundamental ways. It was all disconnected between grade levels, it didn't really get more complex, it just got bigger, and critically, it wasn't set up to actually prepare students for their future careers. But because his idea went against literally every established practice, the Education Commission that reviewed it, well, they just didn't get it. They couldn't see past the model of a teacher lecturing a quiet classroom, and so his project was rejected. Even Akbashew himself knew how huge this challenge was. He famously joked that he'd give a case of cognac to anyone who could fully map out this new cognitive activity for students. It was his funny way of admitting that he was proposing a journey into completely uncharted territory. So the idea got shot down decades ago. A fascinating piece of history, you might think. But the story doesn't end there. The real question is, what's happened since then? It has now been 35 years since Akbashew's ideas were first formally put on the table. For 3.5 decades, this alternative vision for what education could be has been out there in the world. So you'd expect some progress, wouldn't you? Some kind of evolution in our schools. Surely, in over 3 decades, we've moved a little bit closer to a more collaborative, more effective way of teaching. Well, according to the source material, the exact opposite has happened. Instead of making progress, we've actually seen a significant decline in the quality of education, especially in math. The old, broken system has only gotten worse.
And here's the real kicker. To this day, Akbashew's visionary ideas are still just ideas. They remain unimplemented. Nowhere in the world on any kind of large scale has anyone made that leap from passive listening to active intellectual cooperation and self-development. The lecture model is still king everywhere.
Which leaves us with one last massive question. Our modern world absolutely demands collaboration, innovation, and lifelong learning. So why? Why does the very place where we're supposed to be learning those skills, the classroom, still operate on a model of forced isolation? It's a question really worth thinking about.